Have you ever wondered why the great majority of the people on Earth remain so ignorant? Why only a small fraction of the people really succeed at anything in life? Plato gave us the answer 400 years B.C. He said, "Neither do the ignorant seek after wisdom, for herein is the evil of ignorance, that he who is neither good nor wise is nevertheless satisfied with himself. He has no desire for that of which he feels no want." Isn't that about it? I think the great Spanish teacher and author José Ortega y Gasset carried Plato's wisdom right into the 20th century. He points out in his excellent book, Some Lessons in Metaphysics, that even though human knowledge has experienced an almost unbelievable growth during the past 100 years, most especially during the past 50, the great majority of the people have not only cut themselves off from this great growing body of knowledge, they have become, if anything, more barbaric than they were before, and he explains why. The only way a human being can get to knowledge is through study. Ortega y Gasset compares study to paying taxes. It's something people don't like to do, and something practically no one does when he doesn't have to. The great majority of people will go to school just as long as they have to. During that time, they will learn only what is absolutely necessary, which isn't very much, and they will stop on any subject the moment they're allowed to. That's why we have the mind-boggling phenomenon of a multi-billion-dollar school establishment and a nation of people with barely enough useful information to find the seat of their pants with both hands. You see, that answers a question that bothered me, and perhaps you too, for years. The question was, how is it possible in a nation as modern, in a society as advanced, in a standard of living as high as it is in ours, for a human being to reach the age of 50 with so small a collection of useful information? Never in the history of man has a nation offered the opportunities for learning as has the U.S., and had those opportunities as systematically ignored. Succeeding in the free world, and most especially the United States, is not difficult. All we need to do is obtain a fairly good education along the lines in which we're interested, and it's free. We're surrounded by it on every side. It lurks in readiness in our public libraries, in the extension courses of our fine schools and universities. And the great majority of the people sit dull-eyed and slack-jawed in front of their TV sets and occasionally querulously complain because they're not more successful, or tell a British research team they'd like a 20% increase in income. By far the great majority of them are overpaid as it is. But they have what we want. We have only to find ways to serve them better. They are the world's champion consumers. If they devoted a half hour a night to continuing education, they could be the world's smartest people, too, but they don't seem to know about that. Nor do they seem to know that there's freedom and fun in knowledge. As I mentioned earlier, if there's one thing that typifies our society, it's boredom, apathy. Whenever you find boredom, you find the absence of a good idea. And whenever you find the absence of a good and exciting idea, you find a person who isn't using his equipment anywhere near par. In the excellent book, The Nature of Man, there appears the line, "Man tends to achieve his being inasmuch as he develops love and reason." Now, there's something worth thinking about for the next 20 years. Man tends to achieve his being inasmuch as he develops love and reason. Love and reason. Here's where our hope lies, our opportunity for service, growth, and fulfillment. How are we doing in the love department? How good are we when it comes to reason? I think that great line should be made into a little sign that we should put up in our kitchens. It would be a good idea to have it on the visors of our cars as we drive to and from work. Love and reason. And on the job, too. Love and reason. It's hard to improve upon, isn't it? It's the way to transcend the grubby commonplaceness of existence. You know, the most important step a human being can take is the one that leads to transcendence, even a little transcendence. In the same book, The Nature of Man, we read, "Transcend is a tricky word. Let's give it its full meaning by trying to encompass its different specific meanings. Transcendence may be used in a religious or metaphysical context as indicating the existence of a higher power. Transcendence may also mean a liberation from egotism and selfishness, and thus an attitude of openness and real communication with others. Transcendence may finally mean, and this especially in existentialist thinking, a going beyond oneself in time, a reaching out of oneself toward the future. However, one thing is common to the different meanings of the word: going beyond our self-absorbed ego, freeing ourselves from the prison of egotism and relating ourselves to reality. Once the term has been defined, it seems clear that life has a meaning if transcendence is achieved. If man does not limit himself to the selfishness and destructiveness of the mirror created by Narcissus, to give oneself is the only way of being oneself. This paradoxical sentence is only paradoxical in appearance. It can be found in the teachings of the Upanishads, in the Gospels, in the Vedas, and among others, in the writings of Plato, Aristotle, Kant, Goethe, Marx, Scheler, Russell, and Machado. Transcendence is a goal worth working toward, and within the reach of anyone. By getting above the dismal, narrow life based strictly on the ego and learning to give of ourselves to our work, our families, and our play, and by so doing become ourselves, we solve our three major problems at one fell swoop. How we spend our days, our family, our income. Our days will be full and richly rewarding. Our family life will take on new love and meaning, and our income will take care of itself. By really giving of ourselves, we will be maximizing our service, which will automatically maximize our rewards. It's not an easy thing to achieve, but worth working toward, and it can be done in balance, without rush, by getting our priorities straight and organizing our time. An early start helps. Living in balance helps our appearance, too. We tend to look younger when peace and confidence radiate from us. It's been said that everybody's face is his own fault after 40. It reflects the real person inside. I spoke of learning to play golf earlier. My good friend, the well-known golfing writer Gary Wyron, tells of a man in San Francisco who jogs 6.7 miles every morning. That's the distance around Golden Gate Park. He also walks 5 miles to and from work. He works as a banquet waiter, boxes a couple of times a week, and tosses in 8 or 9 games of handball. As you can imagine, he's in magnificent physical condition. He's also 103 years old. His name is Larry Lewis, and he began running in 1876 at the age of 9, and he's been running and keeping as active as he was at that early age ever since. He's made the comment that you should never refer to a person as being so many years old, since old often means something dilapidated. Larry Lewis doesn't intend to become dilapidated, especially during his second 100 years. Gary Wyron suggests that each of us should ask himself these questions. Are my muscles getting soft and flabby? Do I feel chronically tired and dragged out? Am I clumsy performing physical tasks which once were relatively easy for me? Can I feel and see unsightly bulges of fat on my body? Do I have to stop and catch my breath after climbing 1 or 2 flights of stairs? Is my physical zest for life missing or rapidly failing? If you agreed to more than a couple of those questions, you may well become a victim of premature aging. Here's another great contributor to the cardiovascular plague I mentioned earlier. It isn't that we want to live forever, or even as old as Larry Lewis may be, although I think it's a great idea if you're enjoying life, but we can ward off premature disease and avoid looking like 200 pounds of chicken fat in a polyethylene bag by spending just a few minutes a day exercising. I do. I hate it, but I do, and I find it gets me off to a pretty good start. Much better than when I don't exercise. I've never been a physical fitness nut, but I believe we should take care of our bodies just as we should our minds, and to get the best use of both takes exercise. Gary Wyron says that in the absence of crippling disease or chronic disability, there is no biological or physiological reason why a human being need deteriorate markedly until well past the age of 70. Most people don't lose the battle against premature aging. They simply never wage it. Sir Adolph Abrams once made the comment that everybody wants to live a long time, but nobody wants to be old. Well, to a surprising extent, it's possible. Gary Wyron goes on to say, with daily exercise, you'll not only look better, with stronger and firm muscles, and have a more attractive figure and posture, you'll also sleep more soundly, experience less listlessness and fatigue, be able to release pent-up emotions, increase your endurance and capacity for work, enjoy better health, greater longevity, and possess an improved self-concept. It's estimated that only 4 to 5% of the adult American population exercises regularly. Why? Why such an anemic figure in the face of such consequences? The answer lies in the placement of priorities. Our scale of values is cockeyed. Think for a moment. What would you trade for good health? Can you think of anything you would trade for good health? I can't, because with health we can do anything and enjoy it. Every morning I face the chore of exercising. I do it in my dressing room adjoining the bath. I hate it, as I said. It only takes a few minutes. I feel great when I get into the shower after exercising, and I'm glad I do it after I've done it, but I hate to start it. Once I start, I'm okay. It's like getting started with this typewriter of mine. I look for any little excuse to delay it, put it off for a few minutes, but once I start, I'm okay. No one can make you exercise every morning but yourself. It's an excellent exercise in self-control, too. It's truly amazing at how quickly the body responds. Before you know it almost, you'll look years better. You'll have a flat, hard belly and good muscles. Your wind will be good and your step brisk, and, well, it could add many years to your life. I read an estimate not long ago that 80% of all deaths are brought on by obesity, overweight. Now, exercise won't take off weight, although it will redistribute it to some extent. Only eating sensibly will have you at your proper weight and keep you at your proper weight. You can eat the same well-balanced meals, just eat less. Take off 2 pounds a week until you're at your proper weight, then get on the scales every morning without fail. If you've gained a pound or two, take it easy on the groceries. One of the hardest things for most of the population to learn is that food intake must match energy output. When we were in our teens and early 20s, we usually had high energy output and had to eat a lot. In fact, we formed the habit of eating a lot. Now, habits tend to remain constant or actually increase with time. So chances are a given person will continue to eat the same amount of food, or even more as he grows older, and as his energy curve begins to go down. The spread between his descending energy curve and his food intake line will be represented by the spread of his waistline and the seat of his pants. The normal human stomach is about the size of your clenched fist. Before you begin to eat, look at your clenched fist and then eat that much food. End of good health department. You know, we're learning that we took a lot of things for granted which simply are not true, not as we thought them to be. We thought we were educating our children by sending them to our schools, and we've discovered that we have a nation of uneducated people. We thought mankind was moving upward and onward, and found ourselves living in the bloodiest century in the history of human civilization. We thought our technology and progress would give us better health, especially with 2 chickens in every pot, and find ourselves in 20th place in the world health picture. We thought our new higher standard of living, our new wealth, would give us a world free of crime, and we have a national crime picture that makes you want to run for cover. Lots of opportunities lurking in there for a thinking person. And here's a creative thinking problem for you to work on if you like. If you were to lose your present source of income tomorrow, how would you live for the next 12 months? Quite often, military commanders in the field are reprimanded or demoted for falling victim to a surprise attack. It's happened many times. Well, each of us is the commander of his own life and family's defenses, and it's the duty of an intelligent commander to be prepared for any eventuality he can imagine. Now, every member of our family should know what to do, where to go instantly in case of fire. With the crime rate what it is, we should make certain our homes are as secure from unlawful entry as we can make them. It should be high on our priorities list. And we should have a good plan to put into action should our income stop for one reason or another. A woman dying on the roadside as a result of an auto accident was asked why she had failed to fasten her seatbelt. Her last words were that it wrinkled her clothes. Here's a typical, though tragic, mix-up in priorities. We can get our clothes pressed. The sudden loss of income gain is an interesting one for the whole family. Most women tend to be ill-prepared to fend for themselves, not just married women, but young girls just out of school. Most families don't seem to realize that the average woman who marries in our society will work at a job for 25 years. If she doesn't marry, she'll work for 40 years or more, just like a man. And knowing that she must, in all likelihood, work at least 25 years, even if she marries, you'd think most girls would prepare themselves for interesting and well-paying work. Not so. Most young women come into the job market with skills limited to driving a car and talking on the telephone. They're not too good at those. This is true even of most women who go to college. They come to the world of work with no marketable skills, and thus put themselves at the bottom of the economic heap. They also miss the fun of a meaningful career, and they have no ace in the hole in case their marriages don't work out, or the husband dies, or in case they'd like to get back into the swim of things after their kids have grown up and moved out, during the so-called and often aptly called empty years. A woman can be married for 20 years, lose her husband because of death or separation, and still have nothing whatever to bring to the labor market. In 20 years, she could have become expert at anything, playing the piano, interior decorating, selling, retailing, teaching, nursing, secretarial work. Think of the whiz she could have become at typing and shorthand in 20 years. Yet as a rule, she does nothing. She comes to the world of work with a dazed expression on her poor, scared face and with wringing hands. Why? Suppose you tell me. She'll most likely say, I didn't think it would happen to me. Why not? It happens to millions of women every year. How about a little preparation? A few minutes a day add up quickly. Do you know that you can turn out the equivalent of a novel every 3 months by just typing 4 pages a day? The cumulative effect of a little time well spent every day is almost unbelievable. There are hundreds of excellent courses that can be taken. I think it all comes down to the fact that most human beings form the habit early in life of doing no more than they absolutely have to do. They miss the fun of learning, the fun of achieving, beyond the simple chores of their days. When the kids are young, preschool, they occupy all of a woman's time. But once in school, she can usually find time, just as a man can, for some independent line of study. Now, why should we do all this? Why go to all this trouble? Why not just sit down and turn into a kumquat? Well, it gets back to what Gerald Sykes and other experts have pointed out. The worst guilt of all is the guilt of not having become our true selves. The pervasive discontent we see on all sides is triggered more often than not by the inner knowledge that life ought to be better, more fun, more exciting, more interesting. And it should, and it can be, when we bring more of ourselves to bear upon it, when we find more of our real talents, when we reach into the deep reservoirs of ability, even genius, that lurk in each of us. Emerson wrote, "Intellect annuls fate." It means that to the degree that we use the brains we were born with, do we move toward freedom. To the extent that we do not think and learn, are we dependent upon fate, circumstances, chance. A person's freedom depends upon the extent of his thinking. The extent of his thinking might be said to depend in large measure upon how successful he's been in cutting himself loose from the superstitions and alibis and misinformation many of us grew up with. I've long believed that the nagging discontent observable in the lives of so many rests on the fact that they seem to think that there's an easy, effortless way to succeed in life. They forget the rule about opposites. And seeking what appears to be the easy way out, they actually make life more difficult for themselves. By following instead what in the beginning appeared perhaps the more difficult route, the route to knowledge and self-discovery, and by taking what might appear to the casual onlooker to be a considerable risk, it turns out that in a dozen years that pass quickly anyway, they've taken the better, and in the end the easier, safer, more satisfying way. Sooner or later we must realize the truth of Gerald Sykes' marvelous statement that any solid achievement must of necessity take years of humble apprenticeship and lead to estrangement from most of society. Let me repeat that statement. Any solid achievement must of necessity take years of humble apprenticeship and lead to estrangement from most of society. I think we all know how true the first part of that statement is. Always be suspicious of the so-called quick success. Even towering geniuses usually don't reach their best work until after many years of seasoning and dedicated experience. If it comes easy, it usually doesn't amount to much. But what about that part about leading to estrangement from most of society? To become great at anything is to be a nonconformist and cut oneself away from the great majority, even of those in one's own field. The great businessmen, the great professional people, the great educators are all mavericks. The late Dr. Abraham Maslow, former president of the American Psychological Association and the founder of the third force in psychology, kicked over the traces. They thought Marshall Field was crazy, and every really great leader in every field has had to go it alone for a time at least. The person who waits for innovations and ideas to come from others in his field, which is what 98% of the people in every field do, can never be better than second best. He's got to be a follower, a conformist. It's true in banking, in industry, in medicine, education, in every field. You can't go along with the crowd and amount to very much. The two simply don't go together. My old friend Dr. L.D. Pankey of Coral Gables, Florida, comes to mind, the father of occlusal rehabilitation and dentistry, who now travels all over the world teaching his marvelous methods to others. We often see murals in public buildings which depict great masses striving upward toward the sun. It may look good, but it's pure fiction. They not only don't strive upwards, they generally resist whatever good ideas do come along, and throughout history have tried their best to torture, maim, and kill those who have tried to lead them out of their grinding ignorance. We can love people, humanity, in the sense of agape, unselfishly and with a real desire to serve. We can and should love mankind as our brothers and sisters if we can pull it off. But the best-known way on earth to never amount to a tinker's dam is to lose oneself in the crowd. As Will Rogers said, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to reform. So it's true. Any solid achievement must of necessity take years of humble apprenticeship and lead to estrangement from most of society. Peter Drucker, in his excellent book, The Age of Discontinuity, points out that historically the men of knowledge have not held power, at least not in the West. They were ornaments. If they had any role at all at the seats of the mighty, it was that of court jester. There was so little truth historically in the old adage that the pen is mightier than the sword that it can only be called the opium of the intellectuals. Knowledge was nice. Knowledge was a solace to the afflicted and a joy to the wealthy who could afford it, but it was not power. Indeed, up to recently, the only position for which knowledge prepared was that of servant of the mighty. Oxford and Cambridge, until the middle of the 19th century, trained clergymen. The European universities, civil servants. The business schools in the United States, set up less than a century ago, have been preparing well-trained clerks rather than entrepreneurs. But now, says Drucker, knowledge has power. It controls access to opportunity and advancement. Scientists and scholars are no longer merely on tap, they're on top. They must be listened to by the policymakers. They largely determine what policies can be considered seriously in such crucial areas as defense or economics. They're largely in charge of the formation of the young, and the learned are no longer poor. On the contrary, they're true capitalists in a knowledge society. Salaries have gone up fast in the schools. The man of knowledge also increasingly has earnings opportunities outside of academia, through research grants or as a consultant. Drucker goes on to talk about the responsibilities that go with power and mentions that our faculties are chock full of able-bodied people who stopped working the moment they made associate or full professor and got tenure. People in the education industry are much like people everywhere. There's a tendency to do no more than one must, and then wallow in the resulting discontent and alienation. That's my comment, not Drucker's. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the age of the dummy with muscles is past. We've learned that there needn't be a dichotomy there either. Some of our greatest athletes are top students, and the day of poking fun at the bookworm or the good student went out with the ice truck and a rumble seat. Surveys have even discovered that girls prefer men who wear glasses. They say glasses make a man look more intelligent. They're interested in brains, not biceps, although the two, as I mentioned, quite often go together. So an hour a day, improving your mind, is the best exercise habit you can form, and one that pays big dividends in all three of those important departments of life. In one of his plays, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Archibald MacLeish has one of his characters say, "The only thing about a man that is a man is his inker. Everything else you can find in a pig or a horse." Yes, intellect annuls fate, and fear is ignorance. And speaking of good quotations, here's a good one from the pen of the American writer Christopher Morley. There's only one success, to be able to spend your life in your own way. Here's the dilemma that faces most kids in school. How do I want to spend my life? What should I choose to do? What can I do that will fill my life with interest and bring me the particular rewards I'm looking for in life? Christopher Morley's definition might well be carved over the school entrance. There's only one success, to be able to spend your life in your own way. A leading business executive resigned from one of the world's biggest companies to take over the business school of an American university, and he commented that a man ought to uproot himself every 10 to 12 years or so. Morley's definition might mean doing that. It's no longer necessary to stick with one job for life. The Blue Cross people reported recently that ours is the first generation of human beings to experience a middle age of 30 years instead of the old 15. It's true. It used to be 2 chickens in every pot, then it became 2 cars, more recently 2 homes, and now 2 families. More and more people are starting a new child or 2 in their 40s when the first group moves out into college in the world. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and he told me that only about 3% of all American armed force veterans have taken advantage of their GI Bill educational allowances. I remember reading that the employees of Macy's department store in New York had grumbled because the company had been hiring executives and managers from outside the company. So Macy's management put in a free management training program for employees so that it could promote from within the organization. Only about 3% took advantage of the training, even though it was free. All they had to do was stay after work. That 3% figure keeps popping up in cases like that. It seems that only about 3% of the people are seriously interested in investing a part of their time and energy in programs calculated to help them get ahead in the world. The rest yell and flail around for pay raises and more fringe benefits, but when it's suggested that they might do something to improve themselves, make themselves more valuable, upgrade themselves with the times for their own good, No, the old slogan is still, take it easy, but take it. Many years ago, there was a cartoon which appeared in the Saturday Evening Post which depicted 2 men in the mid-30s sitting at a bar with drinks in front of them. One of them is saying, "I want to burn with a hard, gem-like flame. I want to scale the heights, storm the citadel, reach the top." And then there's a pause, and he says, "Now to heck with it." I mentioned Dr. Maslow earlier. Based on his research, growth towards self-actualization is both natural and necessary. By growth, he means constant development of talents, capacities, creativity, wisdom, and character. Phrased another way, growth is the progressive satisfaction of higher and higher levels of psychological needs. In Maslow's words, man demonstrates in his own nature a pressure toward fuller and fuller being, more and more perfect actualization of his humanness, in exactly the same naturalistic scientific sense that an acorn may be said to be pressing toward being an oak tree. It's easy to see in children, but is so often apparently lacking in adults. Psychological growth leads toward psychological health. A person can grow out of his psychological problems and hang-ups just as he can outgrow his clothes. We tend to distrust our natural instincts. We've often been taught that our instincts are bad somehow. Moreover, the growth process requires constant willingness to take chances, to make mistakes, to break habits. One can choose, says Maslow, to go back toward safety or forward toward growth. Growth must be chosen again and again. Fear must be overcome again and again. Maslow also advanced what he called the Jonah complex, the tendency in adults to doubt and even fear their own abilities, their own potential to be greater. As he put it, we fear our highest possibilities as well as our lowest ones. We're generally afraid to become that which we can glimpse in our most perfect moments, under the most perfect conditions, under conditions of great courage. We enjoy and even thrill to the godlike possibilities we see in ourselves in such peak moments, and yet we simultaneously shiver with weakness, awe, and fear for these very same possibilities. The pleasures of growth and development require effort, self-discipline, and a certain amount of pain, but they're worth 1,000 times what they cost. Are you familiar with Murphy's laws? Edsel Murphy is an electronics engineer who's made some significant contributions to the understanding of the behavior of inanimate objects. One is that any error that can creep into a calculation will do so, and that error will be in the direction that will do the most damage to the calculation. Another is that all constants are variables. In any given computation, the figure that is most obviously correct will be the source of error. In the area of production, Murphy's laws go like this. Any wire cut to length will be too short. Identical units tested under identical conditions will not be identical in the field. A dropped tool will land where it can do the most damage. That's also known as the law of selective gravitation. A device selected at random from a group having 99% reliability will be a member of the 1% group. If a circuit cannot fail, it will. A fail-safe circuit will destroy others. Components that must not and cannot be assembled improperly will be. The most delicate component will drop. A transistor protected by a fast-acting fuse will protect the fuse by blowing first. After the last of 16 mounting screws have been removed from an access cover, it will be discovered that the wrong access cover has been removed. After an access cover has been secured by 16 hold-down screws, it will be discovered that the gasket has been omitted. After an instrument has been fully assembled, extra components will be found on the bench. Hermetic seals will leak. The probability of a dimension being omitted from a drawing or plan is directly proportional to its importance. Dimensions will always be expressed in the least usable term. Velocity, for example, will be expressed in furlongs per fortnight. Murphy's laws. I found that they also apply to keys. If you have the right key on a ring of 4 keys, the odds are not 25% that you'll use the right key first. They're more like 1/100th of 1%. And when you want a particular tool for a particular job at home, that particular tool and only that tool will be missing. It will make its reappearance the moment the need for it is past. People who underestimate their ability to think and solve problems should familiarize themselves with recent neurological research. Work at the UCLA Brain Research Institute points to enormous abilities latent in everyone. In fact, the Institute points to an incredible hypothesis. It seems the ultimate creative capacity of the human brain may be, for all practical purposes, infinite. Russian scientists have been amazed by the enormous reserve capacity of the mind. Writing in the journal Soviet Life Today, the eminent Soviet scholar and writer Ivan Yefremov said, "Man under average conditions of work and life uses only a small part of his thinking equipment. If we were able to force our brain to work at only half its capacity, we could, without any difficulty whatever, learn 40 languages, memorize an encyclopedia from cover to cover, and complete the required courses of dozens of colleges." A statement like that makes us realize how we formed the habit of living in low gear, getting by, as Huxley once put it, without too much discredit. It's been found by researchers such as Dr. Maslow that people who live close to their true capacity have a pronounced sense of well-being and considerable energy and see themselves as leading purposeful and creative lives. Isn't that what we all want to do? Thank you. Imagination is everything. I can't remember who wrote those 3 words in that order, but it seems he summed up it all. Imagination is everything. Our lives will reflect the way we use our imagination. The child imagines himself walking like the adults he sees above him. As soon as he can walk, he wants to run. As we reach successive plateaus in life, we begin to imagine ourselves reaching the next one. And thus our imaginations lead us on from one idea to another through every day and every year of our lives. But if we're not careful, our imaginations can lead us into mazes of confused complications from which we may find it difficult to extricate ourselves. So it's a good idea, as we use our imagination, to always strive for simplicity, to avoid the complicated. Remember the 3 main departments of living: family, how we spend our days, work and leisure, and income. If we're wise, we'll work toward keeping each as uncomplicated as possible, as interesting and as rewarding as possible, but at the same time simple and straightforward. Are we living the lives we want to live, or are we living stereotyped lives based on phony values? Usually they're a combination of both, a kind of compromise which says surely other people must have some idea of what constitutes the good life. After all, there are so many of them. But when we look closer, we see that they're living shadow lives, as Mumford calls them. In competition, ice skating, you've seen a couple match each other's movements almost perfectly. It's called shadow skating, I believe. They try to match each other's movements so perfectly that each might be the other's shadow. In any sort of neighborhood, you will tend to find people living much the same way. Their homes, landscaping, furnishings, and lives are typified, if by anything at all, by an almost total lack of imagination. Imagination, like anything else, needs fuel for production. You can't have something from nothing. Thomas Edison said, "I'm a sponge. I want to know the answer to everything." With his great lifetime inventory of information, he could assemble an incredible array of new combinations and permutations. Electric light is a combination of elements, and so is any good idea, or any bad idea for that matter. Most of us make the mistake of not asking why. Why do I live here, in this house, rather than in some other house? Why this life instead of another life? Why this work instead of other work? Why these rewards instead of others? Now, this doesn't mean we'll change anything necessarily, but at least we'll be living lives that have been examined and found to be to our personal liking. We'll know that we're not living the lives we're living simply because they reflect and are pretty much composite copies of the lives we see about us. There should be, to my way of thinking, deep main currents in our lives. Our family lives, our work and our leisure, and our rewards in the form of income. Our family lives should be good and richly satisfying. What is our input here? How are we using our imaginations to bring meaning, charm, and love to our family relationships? It's an ongoing process that should become richer and more meaningful with the passing of time. As we grow older, we should come to love each other more, instead of it being the other way around. Imagination can bring this about, making allowances for unmanageable neuroses or even psychoses that may crop up. I've often thought of producing appointment calendars with weekly reminders that we should think of something interesting to do for those we love, to let them know we don't take them for granted. A dinner out, a weekend trip, flowers, a card, a phone call, a gift, maybe nothing more than a big hug and the words, "I love you very much." The 5 most important words in the language when arranged in that order. Or planning a really interesting vacation 6 or 8 months in advance, instead of waiting until the last minute and finding yourself with nothing very interesting to do. How about your home? Is it what you want? H.L. Mencken once commented that the average home is a house of horrors and doesn't reflect poor taste so much as it reflects no taste at all. People tend to order their steaks medium, and their homes and lives the same way. Medium rhymes with tedium. The family is the most important part of the life of most of us. What good is accomplishment if there's no one with whom to share it? What good is anything if there's no one with whom to share it? And since the family is first in importance, it represents a fertile field for the imagination, not just for the woman in the family, but for the man, and hopefully the kids as well. Family creative thinking sessions are a lot of fun, and a never-ending source of good ideas. Check every idea for basic simplicity. Avoid complication whenever possible. Next, imagination as it applies to the way we spend our days, our work, and our leisure. Let's take them in order. No matter what it is we want, if it's within the realm of reality, we can get it through imagination applied to our work. Nothing now being done by man is being done the way it can and will be. Everything will be done much better. Not can be, will be, whether it's the result of our applied imagination or not. People who resist change in their work are impediments to progress, yet the first words the new person on the job usually hears are, "Now this is the way it's done around here." A business leader made the comment that if we're doing anything this year the way it was done last year, we're obsolete. Now that's an extreme generalization, but deserves careful attention. In most things it's true. Now, while getting new ideas in business is usually the best way to guarantee unpopularity, it's still the only way to renewal and growth. People resist new ideas from the top to the bottom of an organization, especially if it's an older organization. Championing a new idea is a lonely business. But if you believe it's a good idea, if your research causes you to believe it will be of significant benefit, and the costs and disruption necessary to test the idea are not completely out of line with its ultimate benefits, then fight it through. Do it as diplomatically as you can, make as few enemies as possible, but fight it through if you believe in it. The object of management is not to be loved by the people in the organization. It's to make things happen most profitably for all concerned, particularly the customer. People historically have stood in the way of virtually every good idea, and especially if it isn't theirs. Your good ideas can lead to your dismissal from an organization. But ideas are more important than a job. With good ideas, you have independence. There's always a way to succeed. A friend of mine found he couldn't get his ideas through the board of directors. He resigned, and beginning at about the age of 60, he built a $300 million a year business on his rejected ideas. Walt Disney used to ask 10 people what they thought of a new idea. If they were unanimous in their rejection of it, he would begin working on it immediately. Our world today consists of thousands of things people once thought were impossible. How many good ideas have you followed through to completion in your work during the past year? A business whose very beginning and success were based on innovative imagination will become a model of stodgy convention with a few years of good profits. You know, Arnold Palmer's success as a truly great golfer was based on his ability to never try to play it too safely, too cozy. He was never foolhardy, but he would try the more testing shot when others would have played it safe. He lost some tournaments as a result, but he won a great many and achieved world fame and respect, too. There's much to be said for the conservation of assets, but it should be remembered that they tend to slow you down and put more emphasis on saving what you've got than on building for the future. Of course, there's a happy balance between conservation and innovation that should never be lost sight of. Ask yourself, what business am I in? What is its purpose? How does it contribute to the well-being of mankind? And how can I make it better? Not how can we produce more, necessarily. We have almost overproduced ourselves into a world junk pile. In trying to produce more and more, many businesses have lost sight of real quality. Quantity became the god, with a small increment of profit on mountain ranges of units, gadgets, shiny junk that fell apart when the purchaser got it home, knobs that broke or fell off, buttons that came off, toys that couldn't stand the strain of being unwrapped. Towering mountain ranges of shiny, worthless junk, none of it worth our time, let alone our money. There's a rapidly growing avant-garde that will one day represent the majority of the population that is determined to buy quality, and they'll go to any country to get it. We can satisfy this growing, discriminating market now and in the years ahead. Many of our fastest-growing companies are proving it, but it means going back to the old verity. Quality first, quantity second. Both can be achieved through human imagination, the most incredible agency ever to appear on Earth. It all comes back to what we want, and, more importantly, what we want to be as persons. A good profit and a steady growth is all that we need in business. We don't have to shoot off the top of the page. But the chances of truly spectacular growth are better via quality through imagination than through quantity for quantity's sake. It makes no difference whether it's a yo-yo or an automobile. Over the long haul, quality will win out. If the size must be reduced to maintain price and improve quality, we should make it smaller. There's always a way through imagination. You know, each of us has a gold mine between his ears. If he fails to mine the gold, well, that's his business. But it's there, all that we could want, and much more. Now, as to input, We should never stop building our store of information. We can never get an idea without raw material, which is information and application. If there's real talent there too, so much the better, but talent has a way of developing with hard application, daily application, perspiration, long hours of study and deep thought. Become a sponge for information that applies to what you do. Read everything you can find on the subject. Build a fine library of books that are filled with the ideas of others on your specialty, whatever it may be. You know, my wife is a great cook. She must have 30 cookbooks. People who say they're great cooks without ever reading the ideas of others are kidding themselves. I know a writer who refuses to read the works of other writers. He's never amounted to much. Great painters have always learned more from other painters than they did from nature, and they still do. Somerset Maugham laboriously copied the style of writers he admired. I mean, he would sit and copy page after page of the actual words they wrote, so that he could learn how they wrote. He then wrote the stories he wanted to write, with a marvelously finished skill. If we're in management, we can learn from the masters in management. Rohr Hibler and Replogel's book on management and the new Dow Jones-Irwin book, The Enjoyment of Management by John Price, are a couple of good ones to study. You know, when I first started in radio, I listened carefully to the country's best and highest-paid radio personalities. They had learned their skills through many years of hard work. I learned a great deal from them. All I had to do was turn on my radio and listen. Frank Sinatra learned his amazing breath control from Tommy Dorsey, and every great performer who ever lived has had a model or models he or she studied and admired and wanted to emulate. How about you? The person who thinks he doesn't have to study his craft, art, or profession is a pompous fool, and his chances of ever amounting to much are very slim indeed. A never-ending taking in of the best thoughts of the best people in the field of our choice is the best assurance that we will never stagnate, never stop producing. Paracelsus wrote, "Thoughts are free and are subject to no rule. On them rests the freedom of man, and they tower above the light of nature. For thoughts give birth to a creative force that is neither elemental or sidereal. Thoughts create a new heaven, a new firmament, a new source of energy from which new arts flow. When man undertakes to create something, he establishes a new heaven, as it were, and from it the work that he desires to create flows into him. For such is the immensity of man that he is greater than heaven and earth." He went on to write, "The child is still an uncertain being, and he receives his form according to the potentialities that you awaken in him. If you awaken his ability to make shoes, he'll be a shoemaker. If you awaken the stone cutter in him, he'll be a stone cutter. And if you summon forth the scholar in him, he will be a scholar. And this can be so because all the potentialities are inherent in him. What you awaken in him comes forth from him. The rest remains unawakened, absorbed in sleep. We are born to be awake, not to be asleep." And then he wrote, "Therefore, man, learn and learn, question and question, and do not be ashamed of it. For only thus can you earn a name that will resound in all countries and never be forgotten." Hope is one of the loftiest emotions we can experience, for whenever we lack hope, our fruits will also be lacking. He who knows nothing loves nothing. He who can do nothing understands nothing. He who understands nothing is worthless. But he who understands also loves, notices, sees. The more knowledge is inherent in a thing, the greater the love. Everything lies in knowledge. From it comes every fruit. Knowledge bestows faith, for he who knows God believes in him. He who does not know him does not believe in him. Everyone believes in what he knows. Everyone believes in what he knows. And there's your answer to the question, why is there so little belief in anything today? It's because we believe in what we know, and most people don't try to really know anything. You know where I got those great quotations of Paracelsus? From the book The Nature of Man, which I recommended in Direct Line 1. People who say they don't have time for reading, research, and study had better find time or throw in the towel. There's no other way to make it over the long haul. You can't make wine without grapes. There must be input if there's to be output. A time spent each day in study will produce a never-ending stream of interesting, imaginative ideas we can apply to our work. It will also confer upon us a very precious thing, freedom, complete independence. We can live where we please, earn the income we desire, and have a wonderful life through the systematic development of our imaginations. Imagination is everything. What applies to our work also applies to our leisure, our hobbies, avocations. If we play golf or tennis, it's much more enjoyable if we play well. Again, a systematic, never-ending study of the game or sport will keep our ability and enthusiasm growing over the years. We don't have to become obsessed with it or be a professional, but it's great to develop confidence in a real facility for the fun we enjoy: boating, fishing, skiing, flying, tennis, golf, bridge, whatever it is. It's more fun if we're fairly good at it. Working at our hobbies gives us the rest we need from the problems at work and at home. It helps us live in balance with a minimum of friction. You know, scientists are in agreement that the old biblical admonition is correct when it says, "He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that keepeth his spirit is greater than he that taketh a city." If we can catch the vision that life is lived from within out, that it's not so much what happens around us or to us as what happens in us that counts, we can set our own pace, live our own lives, meet situations and people objectively without fear or resistances, and we can become healthier and as prosperous and happy as we want to be. Anyone who knows anything about mechanics knows that friction is the enemy. Steel wheels on rails reduce friction almost to the vanishing point, and an enormous, almost unbelievable load can be moved great distances with surprisingly little power. I had dinner in a restaurant in San Antonio the other night at the top of that great tower that was built for the Hemisphere, and the owner of the restaurant told me that that entire thing turns with a 1.5 horsepower motor. Steel, frictionless balls working on steel rails. We can do the same by reducing friction from our lives. The more friction, the slower we must move with greater effort. Some men in medical research go so far as to say that man has within him a health-maintaining force sufficient to keep him alive and healthy almost indefinitely, if it were not for the destructive effect of uncontrolled emotions. As James Allen wrote, "The calm man, having learned how to govern himself, knows how to adapt himself to others, and they in turn reverence his strength and feel they can learn from him and rely upon him." In all the departments of living, developing calmness, serenity, is worth any effort. It typifies the great person, the true professional. It takes daily practice, especially if we're not a naturally calm or phlegmatic kind of person. The calm person moves ahead. People just naturally look to him for leadership, especially when things aren't going as they should. But not enough has been said about the contributions calmness makes to good health. Good health in man, as it is in all living things, is the natural state. The body has fail-safe mechanisms that automatically go to work whenever good health is threatened. Ill health comes more often from emotional stress than anyone even dares to guess. Friction is the culprit. Developing serenity, a calm, peaceful attitude toward others, our work, and our goals will work wonders in the response we'll get. So we should calm down, slow down, and with a little discrimination as to what we allow to get through to us, we can do much more and enjoy ourselves much more with much less friction and effort. When we wake in the morning, there are 1,000 distractions poised to get at us as we go through the day. They clamor at us in sound and sight. They're frantic, frenetic. They implore, they importune, they threaten, they cajole. If we'd let them, they'd keep us spinning like confused tops. We need to put a sentry at the door to our consciousness and look at the credentials of that which would enter. We can suffer from inner pollution, too. We should be choosy what we let enter our consciousness, as choosy as we are about the furnishings in our homes. A great educator once said something to the effect that the most interesting people are the people with the most interesting pictures in their minds. If you will think of the things that clamor for your attention as paintings waiting to hang on your walls, you can become very selective. A salesman was talking to a farmer who was very much interested in what he was selling. They were standing in the shade of a tree near the house when the sound of the telephone's ringing reached them. The farmer made no attempt to leave. Finally, the salesman mentioned that the phone was ringing, and the farmer commented that he'd had that thing installed for his convenience, not for anyone else's, and went on with the conversation. There is a way to restore charm and interest to our lives, and it seems to be to cut down on the number of things we let engage our attention and make certain that what does get through is good. I had the good fortune to be raised near a harbor. As a kid, I used to spend hours down on the docks watching the ships loading and unloading. They'd bring in cargoes from the distant and romantic ports all over the world, and I used to stand there with a faraway look in my eyes, envying those sailors who were so fortunate. They traveled over the distant horizon to places I could only imagine or read about in my geography books. I hung around so much that some of the mates and skippers finally recognized me and actually invited me on board. I guess you can imagine the heaven that was for me. They'd take me from the engine room to the forecastle and find it the place I liked best, the navigation bridge. The bridge had the best view, but more than that, it was there that the ship was controlled and steered into all those distant places I dreamed of. Once I was even invited to lunch. I didn't get over that for months. It's strange how something like that can have such an overwhelming fascination for a youngster and exert such an influence over his life. As soon as I was old enough, I was on a ship, and I sailed to quite a few of those distant deep-water ports. No matter how long the trip, I never got tired of sailing and watching the sea in all its different moods. Entering a distant port, even if I'd been there before, was always a brand-new thrill. Over the years, I've tried to figure out why I like ships so much, and I believe I've come up with the answer. Ships operate during their entire lives the way we should, but so few do. Maybe you've never thought much about it, but at any given moment a ship is 100% successful. That is, it's either sailing to a predetermined port of call, or it's in port getting ready to sail to another one. A ship owner is smart. He knows a ship can only reach one port of call at a time. You never see any doubt or confusion, or trying to do more than one thing at a time. You can climb up to the navigation bridge of a big, far-sailing ship and ask the captain where he's going, and he'll tell you instantly and in one sentence. How many people do you know who can do the same thing? It seems that most people want so many different things, most of which they're not really sure of, that they're like the guy who jumped on the horse and rode off in all directions at once. What they ought to do is recognize the truth and success of a ship. Pick one port that's important. Sail to it. Then rest and refit for a little while, then sail to another important port. In this way, in not too many years, a man can set and reach his goals one by one until finally he's got a tremendous pile of accomplishments in which he can take pride. He's got all the things he wants, just because he had sense enough to realize he could only do well one thing at a time. There's one other point that fits in here, and maybe it's the most important of all. If a ship tied up to a dock, for some reason had no place to go, it would stay there until it fell apart from rust and disuse. Ships don't start their engines until they have some place to go, and here again it's the same with men. This is why it's so important that each of us have a port of call we want to reach, a goal, a place to get to that we feel will be better than the place in which we now find ourselves. If we don't, well, we might never cast off. We might never know the thrill of sailing a pre-charted course to a place we can't see for fully 99% of the journey. But we know it's there, and we know that if we keep sailing toward it, we'll reach it. You see, ships have a way of reaching their ports. If someone came up to you today and asked you what your next port of call is, that is, where you're going, could you answer him in one sentence like the captain could on the bridge of his ship? If not, maybe you'd better give it some thought. As soon as I was able and had the time to devote to it, I got a boat of my own. I find it to be a wonderfully restful hobby. With a good boat, you can own a home anywhere on Earth. Since 76% of the Earth's surface is covered by water, there are few places you can't go if you happen to love boats as I do. With our little ship, we have a home in Florida, the Bahamas, the Virgin Islands, the Grenadines, South America, Central America, or Mexico. It can take us wherever we want to go, with no packing and unpacking, with our meals when we want them, and good fishing and swimming along the way. And as Dana wrote back in 1830 in the American Classic 2 years before the mast, a ship is like a lady's watch, always out of repair. So you're never at a loss for something to do. There are always a dozen things waiting to be done. It makes for an interesting, busy hobby, with lots of fresh air and sunshine. It's especially good in the winter when you can't play golf up north. The great William James, in his Principles of Psychology, defined genius as little more than the faculty of perceiving in an unhabitual way. In his essay on habit, he referred to habit as the flywheel of society. It's what keeps us doing what we've been doing in the past. It makes us fear change regardless of the present condition of our lives. And the genius, as defined by Dr. James, seems to be that rare bird who knows that change is not only good, but inevitable. He anticipates the inevitable. He's perhaps what makes change inevitable. He habitually looks at everything about him in an unhabitual way. He takes nothing for granted. He knows that whatever he sees that is made by man or served by man is imperfect, is always in a state of evolving. Let me give you a good example. A friend of mine was looking for a site for a large luxury motel. He was in no hurry and spent months in a certain West Coast city looking for the site that would probably best guarantee a good return on the considerable amount of money he was going to invest and borrow. He found the perfect site. It was near a large university, and at the confluence of 5 main roads, one of which was a heavily traveled highway. It was also within the city limits, which would mean a large local trade for the restaurant. There was only one hitch. On the site was an old brick building, an old manufacturing concern, still in business. Well, he called on the owners of the business and told them what he wanted to do. Since the city had, over the years, grown around the old building, he pointed out that it would be to their benefit to sell him the property at a price many times the land's original value and build themselves a new, more modern plant in a less congested area. Well, they saw the sense of his plan and a way to pick up nearly $500,000 for their property and closed the deal. He razed the old building and built his beautiful new motel. Later, he discovered that many people in the motel business had looked upon that site as ideal for their purposes, but had written it off because it was already occupied. He saw it not with the old brick manufactory on it, but instead with his beautiful new motel sitting there. He had looked at that corner in an unhabitual way. Everybody benefited, including the community, by his genius. I think each of us can greatly increase the value of his life by taking to heart Dr. James' definition of genius, by looking at things about us, in our home, and particularly in our work, with new eyes, with the eyes of creation. We can form the habit of seeing things not as they are, but as they perhaps will be, as they could be, as our changing world will insist they be in the future. Our lives are full of old brick buildings that have stood there for too long. We just don't see them anymore, or if we do, we just assume they'll always be there. And maybe they always will, if we don't do something about them. In case the idea impressed you as much as it did me, here's Dr. William James' definition of genius again. You might want to remember it. Genius is little more than the faculty of perceiving in an unhabitual way. Speaking of Dr. William James, he also had something to say about the interesting phenomenon known as second wind. In his essay on vital reserves, he points out that everyone knows what it is to start a piece of work, mental or physical, feeling stale, and we know what it is to warm up to a job. But before too long, we feel the first signs of fatigue. As Dr. James put it, we have then walked, played, or worked enough, so we desist. We simply quit. This sort of fatigue forms a kind of barrier behind which the great majority of people live and work. But if an unusual necessity forces us to press onward, as James put it, a surprising thing happens. The fatigue gets worse up to a certain critical point, then gradually or suddenly it passes away, and we're fresher than before. We have evidently tapped a level of new energy, a second wind, masked until then by the fatigue obstacle we usually obey. In fact, we may find that we have third and fourth winds. The phenomenon occurs in cases of mental activity as well as physical, and in exceptional cases we may find, beyond the very extremity of fatigue, distress, stores of ease and power we never dreamed ourselves to own. It's evident that we have stockpiled reserves of energy that are ordinarily not called upon, but that may be called upon, deeper and deeper strata of power, ready for use by anyone who probes so deeply. I remember one Sunday when I had to write 20 radio programs to be recorded on Monday. I got started at 9 in the morning, and by 5 in the afternoon I was bushed, but I had 10 more shows to write, so I kept at it. Suddenly, I felt better and had more energy than at any previous time, and by 1:30 the next morning, when I finally completed program number 20, I felt great. I felt I could keep going forever. 16.5 hours of steady mental work and typing, and I was fresher than when I started. Great things are done by so-called high-energy people, but I'm sure most of us don't know about or forget about the great reserves of energy which lie dormant in us. Each of us has a tremendous second wind, mentally and physically. Passing through the fatigue barrier to reach these deep reservoirs can make the difference between ordinary or unusual success, between existing and really living. It's good to know we have it.